Hello, good evening, Rabbi Eichberg. Good evening,
Good
everybody.
evening. Wow, you've gone one step up. You actually have a microphone connected to you.
Yeah, I was having echo problems last time, so at least when I waffle on about rubbish, you can hear it clearly now in
You know
stereo.
what? I must tell you, it's been weeks since we've had that great music, and I'm feeling back at home.
Oh, good to have you back. Good to see everybody back again. This Shabbos was lovely in Shul. It was
It was
nice to have
amazing.
so many simchas running all at the same time. That was lovely.
Yeah, it's really, really nice. Martin Glass had two symbols actually, because today they had the Hayyun. Today they had the engagement for Adam, and he also had twin grandchildren, one grandson, one granddaughter in Australia. On top of that, we had Lawrence and Leanne with their simcha, and you had, of course, the Lewis Offroof, which was really, really nice. So it was all very, very nice.
It was fantastic, and you got to see a little bit of people's faces.
I think I got to see a lot of people's faces. On one half, I got to see a little bit of people's faces. On the other half, I got to see a lot of people's faces. I must tell you, one of the most wonderful faces, even if only partially obscured, that we got to see yesterday was Michael's.
Yes, that was amazing. I was glad I was able to see that. That was amazing.
First time
Um,
back in shul for 20 months, and it's been a difficult journey.
yeah, it has, and it's a journey though that I don't think he expected to make. Nobody did really, but he's shown tremendous strength and he's managed to get through it. It's just
It's
unbelievable.
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Remember the early days when we were still, was when we started this program. I think. Oh, Ian's telling us to all watch the YouTube video. Thank you, Ian. We'll get to that soon. We get to Ian's YouTube. When we started this program, then Michael was still in hospital, and then for quite a long time, actually. And then he
He
was out
was,
in
he was,
Paris,
yeah.
and then back in. It wasn't easy.
No, it's not been
It's
an
been a
easy
steep
journey,
climb.
and you could tell that he was. I think, in his own words, he wasn't sure that he was going to be able to sort of get through all of yesterday, or that it would be okay. And he was quite emotional by the end of it. It was lovely.
It was very, very beautiful, and I remember what I think the most emotional time that we had over here on Sunday Night Live by Country Mile was when you had Michael and Gemma having that conversation. Remember that?
Yeah, that was superb. Entirely unscripted, but like
Yeah, but
it was
I
amazing.
was sitting here crying. I don't know about you, but I thought that was just was very, very special.
Good
Hi, Gideon.
evening,
Nice to see
Gideon.
you.
Good evening, everybody.
There's a man actually that'll probably have a lot to say about this conversation tonight.
I bet that this is a man who's got a lot to say about this conversation, but cannot, for reasons that are obvious, comment on anything like this because of his position. But it's interesting because obviously we started this discussion. Was it towards the end of the summer as you were packing
Yeah,
up?
yeah. I'm gonna. I guess I'll lead into this discussion how we got up to this. I think it was the end of the summer, and I was supposed to. We were actually going to do a Sunday night live, and then I forgot I had a wedding that Sunday night. So I said, look, I can't really broadcast Sunday night live from a wedding. That's not really going to work. And then the week after you were away, and the week after I had a wedding again, and there was Rosh Hashanah, and then came. It was just one after the other, which is why we've had this break. Just to let everybody know, Sunday night. Yeah, agree with that. We got Michael and Gemma, genuine heroes. Here. Yeah. And just to let everybody know, I think looking forward, we're hopefully going to be having Sunday Night Live once every couple of weeks as opposed to once every week. The idea on the one hand was that the survey showed that people wanted to continue this virtual programming, but on the other hand, I think people can get out, and Sunday night is a great night to be able to get out, and lots of different venues have opened up and abilities, opportunities for people to get out. So I don't think it's right to do it every single week. But if if too many people come back and say we like it every week, I think we'll relook at that. But I think at the time, so I came to you and I said, we cleaned up. We were in this campus in Ipswich, and we had to clean up over there. And it's the last day, and they had the girls clean up for hours and hours. There was this whole cleanup that was going on over there, and the girls were really tightly packed because they didn't have enough bedrooms, so they cleaned out classrooms and they put 10 girls in a classroom. It was a whole thing, and I hadn't been into those classrooms because I, as the rabbi on board, and maybe even as the one in charge for this year, it just wasn't appropriate for me to be going into anywhere near where the girls' bedrooms were. And they finally moved down, and I came inside over there, and they had officially cleaned it up, and it was a tick. It was still quite messy. And it's interesting. I had a conversation with my wife today about it, and I said, I was quite unimpressed with the level of cleanliness or lack of cleanliness that these girls felt was acceptable. Yeah, it was fine to leave a whole bunch of stuff on the floor, leave all sorts of stuff behind. It's very, I don't know. It just smacked to me that in a way that there was a certain amount of either lack of ability to clean up, lack of want, and also that the parents hadn't inculcated in them. And it was also a lack of, this is the other thing that oftentimes I remember years ago. Do you remember? I don't know if did your grandparents ever tell you this? I remember hearing this. When we were young, if we lost our coat in the winter, we didn't get another one.
Yeah.
Did you hear that one? Did your grandpa? I don't know if they said that in England. Did they say that in England?
I think I remember that as they were buying me my fourth coat that year. Yeah.
But I always used to think to myself, really? I mean, did kids actually freeze in the winter? I mean, okay, if you really didn't have any money, you didn't have any money.
So my dad famously always used to tell me that school children in those days never, male school children anyway, never used to get to wear long trousers. It was always shorts, even in the winter. But I think what you picked up on is not necessarily sort of a level of cleanliness that these kids have or a standard of cleaning that they should carry out, but it's attention to detail. And it's also that if you're asked to do a task, you do it out of respect to everybody else because you feel
you do it well. And you do it well.
Yeah, you should do it. You should do it well. You should do it to a certain standard. And that to you perhaps belies the fact that these children of that generation, it's not necessarily that maybe it is that they're not being brought up correctly, but they don't take it as seriously, these sort of things, as seriously as previous generations did.
I think there was another point that also stuck out to me, and this is part of what was going on in my head. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I know, well, I know lots of people in lots of different households. And I would venture to say, and you could correct me on this one, what would you say, David, would be the percentage of people that have domestic help amongst the Jewish community?
Oh, wow. I wouldn't know any reliable statistics, but I think if you were to flick through the Hamish advertisers and all those sort of message boards, you'd see a lot out there about cleaners and so on. So yeah,
sure. But I mean, it's not only in the Hamish communities. I think it's in all communities. I think across the Jewish community, there are a lot of people that have domestic help. And part of the idea, or part of what was going on in my head is that because everybody's got domestic help, nobody knows how to clean up. I mean, or is that, am I making over here an assumption that doesn't make any sense?
I think that might be a bit unkind, but I think that people have large families, and I think they're unable to, and people are working a lot more. This isn't a 1950s household where the man gets home from work and there's dinner on the table. The kids are immaculately put together and ready to go back to bed.
I don't believe that happened in the 1950s either.
Well, I think it happened a lot more, where let's face it, women, of my grandmother's generation would have played a domestic role in the house.
They would have been the homemaker, mainly a homemaker. And if 100%. They had a job, it was a really, it was a part-time thing. It wasn't in general.
And so perhaps in their day, there was enough time to do cleaning and cooking and washing and whatever it would be. But today, if you were to look at those roles, we don't bring up our daughters to believe or understand that they have to do those things. There's a lot more choice these days, which I think probably is behind most of the topic that you want to talk about. Because today, young children can choose to be whatever they wish, and we actually encourage them. We bring them up to believe that they're capable of fulfilling their dreams and their, you know, all their destinies of whatever it is that they want. They can choose to be. They can choose to live their life as, let's face it, in the modern era, you choose to live your life as the gender you want. There was a great headline on the JT this week all about that kind of story. You can choose your own name. You can choose your orientation in life. You can choose a religion. We wouldn't necessarily bat an eyelid the same way that our grandparents' generation would have done. I think we are a lot more forgiving. And
we definitely are a lot more forgiving.
And the question is,
but is that a good thing?
And that is the question.
Right. All to do with parents if they grew up with it. Interesting. Yeah. Is that, you know, our good question. Who are the girls' role models? Their mothers. I don't know. I don't know who the role models are. That, you know, I didn't have the conversation. The girls had left already, and we were just looking around. But I think in general, it made me feel like, you know, I think this, you know, the conversation or the topic can be broadened out beyond just learning how to clean, and beyond even what you said is, you know, are we creating resilient human beings as children, and are we giving them really the skills that they need? I'll tell you something interesting. I just got a message from somebody, literally about 5 minutes ago. I read this message. Somebody messaged me and said to me, he said, you know, there are all these courses for parents about how to parent and how to get on among, you know, as parents with each other, and how to get on with your children. And this young man sent me a message saying there are actually no courses for teenagers how to get on with their parents. And I think it'd be a great idea. I'm not making this up, by the way. I think it'd be a great idea, you know, for us to put on a course, like, you know, for teenagers to understand your parents. When your father just come home and he's in a bad mood and he's not eaten yet, now is not the best time to mention to him that you'd like to, you know, take a crack at taking another test, which is going to cost him another 100 quid, you know, at your driving test. It's just not the best time for you to get a yes.
I think, I mean, I don't know what it's like in your household. I'm going to guess that the more religious a household, the less the communication is electronic, put it that way.
That's
but
true.
I would hazard a guess that most parents don't get to have that full conversation with their kids necessarily. There is an awful lot of shorthand messages being passed on. And so if my kids wish to relate to me, for instance, that something is urgent, they don't need to ask their mother to pass the message on. They don't wait until I get home. I will get a message during the course of the day that such and such needs to get done or bought or whatever it may be. And so, and that
I only get that from my wife at the moment.
It's great. It's just another source of reminding you to do whatever you need to do. But I think a lot of the communication, I don't think we're any different from other households. I think a lot of communication these days, we have, again, these kids have choices. They don't need to come and have a full face-to-face conversation with you. And so, yes, we can educate these children how to respond and how to communicate with their parents, but they have other avenues of communication that perhaps you never had to have when you were a kid. Because you didn't have access to the technology. Good evening, Beth. Beth says in the 80s, the parents didn't challenge the teachers like they readily do now. Now parents protect and defend their children more.
Interesting, because Deborah Foster actually said the same thing to me that Beth just said. And, you know, it's interesting. We were having this conversation, and are we, you know, it's a, I guess it's a fine balance. On the one hand, I think, you know, when the parents only believe the teachers, as a child, you really felt like you weren't heard. Do you know what I mean? You really felt like you came home and you said, my teacher bullied me today. And then they called the teacher and came back. The teacher didn't bully you, and next time behave. Whack. Yeah, that seems to have been the way it was done in the 1980s. And it's changed. So today, you know, you come home and you say, my teacher bullied me, and you get a phone call. I've had this because I've taught, and I've gotten irate phone calls from parents who've been like shouting down I could tell that the fellow was extremely aggressive in the way he was saying things, even though he wasn't shouting. And I said to him, listen, you're a teacher yourself. Why don't you let me give you another version of the story so that we can compare and contrast notes over here and see, maybe we can piece together what happened, because the truth probably lies somewhere between my version of the story and his version of the story. I think parents have more or less jumped on the bandwagon of their kids now exclusively. Or
and let's put it this way: most of the time during the day, when they're not under our care at home, they're at school. And so in many ways, we delegate our responsibilities as parents to teachers to raise our children a little bit during the day, to give them some sort of a moral guidance in school, where the rules are, what the rights and the wrongs are, and that is on top of all the other education that they get. So arithmetic and spelling and whatever else is important these days. But if the teachers don't feel confident enough to discipline children because they're worried about the backlash from a parent coming in, then I would imagine that the sort of discipline that schools have and the sort of rule keeping that schools have has also been as diluted as it is at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know that there are schools where, the schools are really, really struggling with the discipline, with the behavior management. And I think we've gotten to the point, because I've had this conversation with young women in camp, what can a school do today that will keep a young man or young woman in their place? What tools do schools actually have nowadays? What would you say?
We were talking over the weekend. I don't know how we even came onto this topic. Oh, I'll tell you how we came onto this topic. Yeah, I think one of my children were acting out at the time. And I had that conversation that started in my day.
Yes.
And in my day, there were several teachers at school, local school, Broughton Jewish. It's not scandalous because I think it happened everywhere at the time. You would get a whack. And there was one teacher in particular who had a briefcase full of different types of slipper. Each one of them had a different nickname. So, for instance, the tartan one was called Scotty. And if you did something wrong, you had to pick your punishment. You had to pick which of the slippers you had, and you get 6 of the best. And that's in the
that's already a little bit too strong. You know what I mean?
Sorry?
To pick is a little bit too strong already. Like, which one are you going to choose today? What's your favorite slipper to get hit with? I mean, that's ridiculous.
It was very much part of that the previous generation. You speak to people who went to Rebbe Balkin's cheder, and this isn't to besmirch his good name. He educated hundreds, if not thousands,
and they all speak so well of him. They all
loved him.
Taxi drivers that I know who've been to Rebbe Balkin all swear by him.
They all loved him and they all speak of him fondly, but they all, to a person, will tell you a story about when he disciplined them.
Yeah.
And that just simply isn't there. So the ultimate threat of that kind of punishment isn't there. And so what sanctions do a school have against a pupil? You can exclude them from class. Many parents will say excluding my little angel from class actually makes them feel left out, and it makes it even worse.
Yeah. But some parents say the other way around.
I refuse to believe that anyone as well behaved as Rodney Barkley ever saw the cane in his day.
No, he didn't see it. He just knows that his classmates received it on occasion. Yeah, but I mean, for some kids are like, what are you going to exclude me from the class? That's even more fun. I don't have to sit through this whole boring lesson.
I had a conversation with a parent.
And I've seen detention, and I've all the girls that I spoke to, and probably if I spoke to the guys, I'd say the same thing. Lines, yeah, lines don't. First of all, as a teacher, have you ever counted the lines that I don't think teachers count the lines. They say you get 200 lines. You bring 1 page of lines and it's done.
I only ever got lines once in my school career, but I think what would worry me more than anything, if I had detention at school, my parents found out about it, I would be worried about my parents' reaction. And I don't think that kids care about that anymore. I don't think they're guaranteed a bad reaction from parents.
In
I think
general, they're
that
not. I think in general, the parents have now switched to the other side, and they've taken the side of the children above all else.
Clive says it's probably a reaction to the way we could not challenge teachers in the past, no matter how bad they were.
That's an interesting point, and I think there is a middle way. I think I don't think we should go back. Clive's right about that also. Best teachers did not need corporal punishment to control the classes. I think, but that's true in all instances. Good teachers. I remember listening to chinuch courses, and the fellow over there said the best teachers don't need all these discipline issues because the kids want to hear what they have to say because they're interesting. Because you spend the time making your lesson interesting.
I wish I could ask Gideon. I can't because he's obviously not. I wouldn't blame him for not wading into this debate, but I wish I could because I'm willing to bet that the job of teaching these days is a lot harder than it was in those days. Not just because the multitude of hats you have to be juggling in terms of keeping everybody happy, but you are playing a number of different roles. So yes, you're going to be playing the role of an educator, a teacher. You also have to be a disciplinarian. But if you look at what Beth has said here, she says with the government cuts, there's not enough non-verbal therapy and pastoral care offered. I would wager that part of Gideon's job is also going to have to be being part therapist to the child, having to listen to them, having to mediate between them and the parents, and safeguarding as well is a whole other ball game that really we never used to get our hands dirty with back in the old days.
Yeah. So I mean, I would I would tend to agree with everything that you said. That a teacher has teachers don't have it easy. I think when people think to themselves that teaching is a cushy job, you try it. You want to think that teaching is a cushy job and you get that much holiday and it's so easy. You try it. You stand in front of a class of 25 or 20, boys, girls, mixed, whatever it is, and try your luck. Because I've seen the most confident, competent people being ripped to shreds by 20, 10-year-olds. And 20, 10-year-olds could literally make mincemeat of almost anyone they wanted to, if they wanted to.
So I've read somewhere that a teacher who resorts to negative behavior management is not teaching a lesson or giving a message. Behavior management should be the use of positives, aspiration, and being an example. So that's what we expect of modern teachers today. But let me flip it on its head.
So I would ask you the same question. Have you ever had employees that didn't do what they're supposed to be doing at your job, and have you given them positive admonishment? Have you said, listen, mate, you're going to have to shape up a little bit, otherwise we're going to have some issues?
Yeah, and I think you do, and I think normally by the time you have to have that chat, I think they know that it's coming. Very rarely has anybody sort of had one. I've had one of those discussions with someone, and they've gone, I didn't realize that standards had slipped, or that I hadn't done what I was meant to do, or that I handled something in not the best way. So I think they take part of that responsibility initially, but it's whether or not you have to keep having that conversation, because you can have positive pep talks with anybody only so many times. Eventually, if that behavior persists, then you're going to have to set in boundaries, and you're going to have to say, look, if X doesn't happen, then Y is going to take place, and that's what people need to know, that actions have consequences. And I must tell you, in the workplace, that is also not an easy thing to do, and it's also a symptom of our generation, of our time, of the way that rights have progressed. Is that you cannot just, in the old days, you used to be able to fire somebody rather quickly if you didn't think they fit the bill, or you weren't getting along. That's what you could do, but you don't have that now. You have a series of disciplinaries, and you're encouraged to mediate. We've become much more touchy-feely, and I think that the same goes for parenting, the same goes for teaching, and the same goes for the workplace, and even to a certain extent in our relationships with one another, marriages and so on. It's not the way that it used to be. it's a very soft playing field now, and it's almost a nightmare to navigate sometimes and to get it right, to be able to give everybody what they want and still get that result, almost impossible.
But does that mean, and this is really part of what the discussion was going to get to, does that mean that we're really creating a generation that doesn't have the backbone because all I can give is positive reinforcement? And if I ever send home a note saying your son was a nightmare in class today, I'm going to have an irate parent on the phone saying, was he the only one that was talking? Tell me the truth. Was he the only one that was talking? No, but he was the one that stood out because he was screaming. Well, everybody else was talking, so why did you decide to punish my child? Have you ever heard that kind of thing? There are other people that also are behaving. And is this the kind of thing that your school does? Maybe you should do a better job at teaching your lesson, and then my son will behave. Maybe you should prepare a little bit better. Why are you coming down hard on my son? Do you know how many lessons he has to have every single day? And you know that it's not easy for him to get up in the morning, and he gets up every morning anyway and comes to school and trudges through the rain. And I'm like, can't help it. That's just being a child or being an adult. That's just part of growing up, isn't it?
I think to a certain extent, every generation feels that the generation before theirs had it harder, or they had some sort of life lesson that taught them to act differently. I mean, in previous generations, we would have referred to the sort of survivor generation after the Second World War. The Second World War itself, if you were to talk to people who talk about that period of time nostalgically, they'll tell you that it was the greatest generation of heroes that ever lived. That, men and women were brave and everybody was polite and we all looked after each other, and that whole blitz spirit that they talk about having here in England is a world away from some of the sort of stuff that you see in post-Brexit Britain today, if you were to fast forward 50, 60 years. But I just don't, I'm not sure if that is true. Perhaps that generation also would have been viewed by the Victorian generation as being completely out of control as well.
Well, the Victorian generation had it a lot harder than we did. I mean, just getting water to the house was a big pain. We just turn on the tap and out comes water. I speak to people about what I like to call first world problems. You ever see somebody and he's like, oh, the 4G in this place is awful. Yeah. So I call that a fourth, that's really a first world problem. When the people in Africa that don't have food or they don't have clean water, and I'm moaning about my 4G internet not being as fast as it's meant to be, or that the 5G masts aren't really all over Manchester yet, and even though I was promised 5G, it's not really working. That's really, I mean, that's what people consider an issue today. People actually make a whole fuss of this. I mean, look at what happened last week, for example. The fact that WhatsApp is a big communication tool, but the fact that Facebook went down, or the fact that Instagram went down, really to 99% of the people who aren't using it for business,
or even, I'll tell you, or even WhatsApp. There used to be a time in business and in relationships and with whatever that you couldn't just send a text. If somebody was out at work, it would have to wait till they got home. If you wanted to reach somebody and they weren't at the other end of the phone, you had to wait maybe a day to speak to them. Yeah. If you wrote them a letter, you might wait 2 weeks for a response. Yeah. And nowadays, we've managed our own expectations by making everything instant, and we've got a generation of young people out there. I might even include myself as part of that, where if I want groceries delivered to my house in 2 hours on a Sunday evening, I can order it now and I'll have it at my door in 2 hours' time. And that is something that my grandparents' generation could never have had.
You never dream of. They never. No, but they never in their mind also, like, why would I need my groceries within 2 hours? It's like, I think the actual concept of it would be foreign to them. Like, all right, I'll get an apple tomorrow. I don't need apples now. I don't, I'll make the cake tomorrow, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you go to the cupboard and the item that you want isn't there. You go, okay, I'm going to order it. You put it on the shopping list, and now the expectation is you can have it instantly. But this is the world that my children live in. So my one one of my children wanted me to order something for them. I think it was for a school project or for something that they were doing. And I looked at it and I said, okay, it will be delivered by the end. I think it was the 26th of October. It was going to arrive. And they said, why not tomorrow?
Amazon
Why
Prime.
can't we have? Why can't we? I said, do you need it before the 26th of October? Well, no. Well, we need it for the 30th, and I just want to make sure that it arrives in time. And they start to get anxious when it isn't the way that they're expecting it to be. So this is a symptom also of the technology that we have at our fingertips. The fact
So
that
maybe
you've
it's
got
actually society, and we can't blame parents or educators for it. Because what are you going to do? We've created an instant society. What are you going to do? You're going to keep your kids in the dark ages? When your kids ask for an apple, they'll say, you have to get the apple in 2 days because my grandparents got apples 2 days later.
the corner shop. How many of those are there still around? If they're not a local Sainsbury's or so on. Although Sheffice's pretty much constantly open. Other kosher shops are available.
Sainsbury's local is quite good. It's open from 7 in the morning to 11 at night, and we've gone there when we've needed something.
It's fantastic, but I do think that the technology that we have will create a special sort of anxiety, and it will also push children to having unreasonable expectations as to what life will give them and when it will deliver it to them. And if you want a life that will give you anything that you want, and that it should be delivered as quickly as possible, it takes away this whole nobody works for anything. Nobody sort of has any patience. We want everything today and now. And therefore, maybe if we lose our patience in class with a teacher, we'll say something today and now that we shouldn't have done, because we were never told we needed to just, sometimes children, one of the hardest things is, why do I have to do that? Why do I have to do that? You explain to them why they have to do it, but I don't want to do it. And you have to explain that sometimes life is about doing the things that we don't want to do, that we don't have that choice. But I think all too often we ourselves have told our children that they should be happy and that they should have dreams and they should have goals, and if they work hard, they'll get them. Are we really setting them up to fail by promising them that? A lot of our children will try very, very hard and they'll never achieve their dreams or goals. It's just the way that life is.
Why do you say that? I'm not sure that's true. Why do you say that?
Because I think that these days, when you look at I think these days when you look at job satisfaction, for instance, you pick a profession that you want to do. We are told that we should love to do our jobs. Yeah. In my grandparents' generation, you picked a job that was sensible, that would pay you reasonably, and that you could get work in, right?
And that would allow you to feed your family.
And that would allow you to feed their family. And that was it. That was the only criteria. You had no right to love your job. That wasn't if you loved your job, all the better. All the better. It was a massive bonus. But you didn't necessarily get raised to believe that, that this kid needs to love what they do. They needed to love being a dentist. As it happens, I believe my grandfather really loved being a dentist.
I think he did. I spoke to him about it, and he really spoke. I mean, he used to love speaking about it.
And I've
the clinic he created in Israel and all. He used to speak about it very fondly.
He loved that job, but the point is, the reason he chose that job at the time, he didn't have a clue about dentistry. The NHS, he was one of the first NHS dentists, so there wasn't anything, to tell him what working for the NHS would be like. Had no idea, but he knew that dentists normally are in the pain game, so they're in a profession where people will constantly need them, and therefore he should be able to put food on the table. And that was his only criteria. And so when he came to ask me about how my work was, he'd never asked me, David, how's work? Are you enjoying it? He would always only ask me, is there much work at the moment? And that, because in his day, that was important, that the answer to that question should always be yes.
Because if there's no work, there's no money. If there's no money, how do you feed yourself?
Yeah, that's it. Beth has got an interesting comment here, but excluding children isn't the answer either. Kids are often happy to be told that they can stay at home. This only serves to punish the parents. The answer is finding each child's strength, and this is only possible by employing a multidisciplinary team supporting each school. This takes up significant time that teachers just don't have. I'm a retired senior child protection worker. And so that's very much
experience, and that's right.
That's a rich experience, and that's very much the flavor of what the modern perspective of schooling should be, that it should be a holistic experience, that in an ideal world each child's needs will be different from its peer, and so therefore they can't all be taught in the same way, and we can't expect them to behave in the same way either.
I don't think there was, for example, differentiation when with my teachers never, nowadays when you prepare a lesson plan, you have to have on there, I got, make up names, John and Jill, so John is the clever kid in class and Jill's not as clever. Pardon if anybody's called John or Jill on this, I'm just choosing two names at random. And you have to then decide, I'm going to ask Jill a question that she can answer, that's going to be the easy question. And the follow-up question is going to be harder, has to go to John. And I need to prepare that before I walk into that classroom, knowing full well that Jill just can't do what John can. And not only that, I think today we have like scales of grading. So the kids that are not as academically gifted will be given like a handicap. Like in golf, you can stand up in golf and say, well, I'm not as good as Tiger Woods, so my handicap is 350. Compared to Tiger Woods. But in reality, in life, see that I think that's part of the issue. In life, you don't get a handicap like that. If somebody walked into you, David, and said, I need a job at Normies, but typing is not my thing, and telephone manner is not my thing. But you know what? Work with me. You'd probably say, you know what? I think being in the estate agent industry is not the thing, because you need to be able to speak to people on the phone.
I think the answer to that question is if you go to small businesses up and down this country, it doesn't need to be estate agents, and you are to ask them to change the employee experience there, those businesses by and large are still run very much as independent businesses. They're very, very small. They don't have time to adopt the way that they do things or to work with people. There are some fantastic ones out there that do, but if you were to look
should they be doing that?
If you look at the big corporate enterprises and you say, listen, I'm sorry, Mr. Corporate, but actually getting up at 9 a.m. in the morning just doesn't suit me. And my brain doesn't switch on till 11 at least. And then only then I have to have a couple of cups of coffee. So I'm going to see you about 12 o'clock. And that's what they call flexi time as well. So, that you can chop in and chop out. In the old days,
Facebook that has 300,000 employees around the world or something like that, you can say to this guy, look, I got enough people working from 9 to 5. You want to work from 12 to 7, be my guest, or 12 to 8, be my guest. But, I don't think, like you said, small SMEs, small and medium enterprises, they don't really have the luxury to be able to do that. And I think if people grow up in a school where everything is like, don't you worry, if you can't do the maths, you only have to get 3 out of 20 right. For you, that's okay. For you, that's a wonderful score. Don't get 2 out of 20 because that's no good, but 3 out of 20 is okay. And when you start to do that, this kid starts to say, wherever I'm going to go, everyone's going to be happy with me when I get 3 out of 20.
I would love to tell you that the answer is that life isn't always beautiful and that the world isn't a beautiful place. It will chew you up and spit you out. And it's very unforgiving. You don't get second chances necessarily, and you need to do your best. But I believe that things are changing, and I believe that you do sometimes get second chances, and that we're engineering a society where we take it very easy on people.
I know, but I think that there'll always be somebody out there that will, where life isn't fair, and whether it is in your job or whether it is with your kids, somewhere, some place, So I have my kids. Some of them have the ability to be quite sharp as the way they say things. And David Fruman likes to always say to one of my kids, he says, "One day life will teach you, and they'll shut you up." He always says that, and we always laugh about it. But I often think to myself, he's probably right, because you can have a banter with somebody in shul, and they'll probably take it lightheartedly. But you can't always have banter with your customers. You can't always have banter with your boss or your coworkers, and they might not see it the same way. I mean, you only have to look at the way people are now, and I'm not excusing it, but people have turned sometimes, terribly sexual references. Oh, come on, this is just banter. And they tell the women to just look past it, because it's just banter, and that's not okay.
So, I mean, maybe we're touching on another part of the topic. I'm just going to read out Clive's comment that the majority, this is going back to talking about loving your work. The majority of people have always worked for money and not for love. It's the Jewish dream for our children to have jobs that they love, which is not achievable for most, i.e., we are setting them up to fail. And Clive, I'll tell you, outside the Jewish world, that same dream is being sold to kids up and down the country. We now live in a system in most developed countries where there are prizes for second place, and that we are, we're giving out awards for trying, but we are not necessarily, people are not necessarily getting through on their merits either. So we are setting them up to fail, because we are not telling them that life does not select its winners like that either.
But I mean, why? But the question to me is, why is it? Okay, I don't know about you. Like, I feel that I love my job. I think you're quite good at your job. My guess is that you love your job as well. But why is it? Why is it actually that it's not true that kids, or that we can tell the kids that they can find something that they will enjoy? Or is it because whatever they're going to enjoy is not going to pay them a salary?
So two things. I mean, you mentioned something in passing there before. You said, and I don't think you were referring to ability, but let's assume that it's ability. You said that certain of your children can have a skill or have a propensity to say some things in a certain way, and certain of your children therefore won't. So I will have children that, my children are not all the same academic ability. Yeah. They don't have all the same, and I know that, and they know that. But is it fair for me to say to the one that doesn't have the same academic ability as the other that they should perhaps focus their talents elsewhere? Do I, as a parent, have to realize that and try and nurture something else? Or should I tell all my children, don't worry, it's amazing what you do, and if you try hard, of course you're going to be a nuclear physicist? It's simply not a realistic expectation that whatever their goals may be, that they can achieve. But I've bought into it, so I'm guilty of it. I have raised my children to believe that there's nothing that they can't achieve with hard work. In reality,
there is nothing they can't achieve. They'll just have to work much harder to become that nuclear physicist. Well, I mean, there are certain...
Maybe, but it's
okay.
It's
I mean,
not,
if this kid is dyslexic, nuclear physics, it might not be their thing. We're going to end up blowing up the laboratory because he took two numbers and he swapped them around. But
it's not realistic. Just as I'm never going to be an Olympic athlete, I don't think,
I don't think I'll be one either.
But we as parents, we nurture our children these days, and this is a societal goal, and it's a societal norm nowadays, that we should not tell our children that they don't have a reasonable chance at achieving something. We have to instead tell them, it's almost like the American dream, that whatever it is that they want, they can have, but they just need to stick the hard work in. And for some of them, it's not going to be the truth. And that's sad, but it's true. And that's life.
And is that so? Then you're really setting up your child for failure by telling them, like, if you were to say to that child that, let's say, that can't be the nuclear physicist, honey, you could be that nuclear physicist. All you have to do is you have to want it enough. And so in reality, you're setting up your child to fail, aren't you?
I think if you're not arming your kids with the tools to accept disappointment as well and failure, then that's also part of the job that you're not doing. So in encouraging them to achieve their dreams and that they could do whatever it is that they want, at the same time, what you're not doing is telling them that, by the way, Bubala, sometimes life can be extremely difficult. It can be extremely hard. It's not going to be polite. You will be insulted. You may not make it. You might fail. And this is what you do in those situations. We're not spending enough time doing that, because to acknowledge failure is to almost tell them like there's a chance they're not going to make it.
But maybe we should teach them from our own failures.
Maybe.
We're going to fail. I'm going to fail. You're going to fail. We're all going to fail at one point or another.
I've failed several times today, and I think that the trick to life is to fail often, and right. to learn from those. Each of those negative experiences in life is going to be a learning experience.
Yeah, but that's the question I'm asking you. Have you taken that learning experience and passed it on to your kids? Do you come home sometimes and say, kids, today I stood up and I wanted to do X, Y, and Z. Today I thought I was going to give a sermon and I thought it was going to be very funny or it was going to be whatever. And afterwards I had a few people come over to me and say, Rabbi, that was totally insensitive. Right? Let's make up an example, which is something that could happen. You know, Baruch Hashem, it's not happened yet that people have said insensitive. I've gotten people come back to me and say, you know, Rabbi, I really disagreed with what you said. I thought what you said was awful. I thought what you said made no sense. I've had all of that. And you know what? It's fine. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it. But, you know, if I've had a lot of people say it about a sermon, then I realize, okay, that one was a failure. That one was no good. And there's nothing wrong with me going home and saying to the kids, you know what? I feel that whatever I did today, it wasn't my best effort, or I got it over the head for doing it. And, you know, in life, you're going to get it over the head. In life, people sometimes are going to come after you and going to say, we don't like what you did.
Well, let me ask you a question then as a rabbi, and you can choose whether or not you wish to answer this. And as a member of the executive, I wish you to take it easy before you answer this question. But you in some of our discussions, we referred to the modern term, the Snowflake Generation. And the Snowflake Generation, it's a very... That term in itself is very controversial, because this generation don't like being called by that name. It's derogatory in some people's estimations, and in other people's estimations, it's an accurate description of how easily this generation is offended by things. Is your job then as a rabbi, if you need to stand up and you need to give moral guidance to your flock, as it were, and you need to sometimes stand up and say negative things? You're not always going to be able to stand up and say positive things. You may feel there's a bit of mussar that needs to be given to your congregation. How hard is it, knowing in this day and age that people almost have an instant right to become offended by anything that goes against their core belief or notions of what's acceptable? It must be very, very difficult.
So I'll say two things about that. Number one, I've not done it that often. I really don't feel that I've done it that often. I do think back once in a while to a time where I did it, and you know, it was a Rosh Hashanah and in the parallel service, and I came down extremely hard on that time. And I remember getting different comments from different people. And, you know, and I don't know that, you know, I remember at the time it had to do, I'll tell you, you know, we might as well talk it out, you know, it had to do with the round tables.
Yes.
And, you know, it was going into the parallel service and, you know, the being told that this is the more serious service. This is the quiet service. This is a service where people come for davening, as opposed to in the main shul where a lot more of the less involved Jews came. And I walked in and I saw some of these round tables and some of the other people. And I thought to myself, the talking here is just as bad as it is everywhere else. It's just that the davening is much faster. That's the only difference between here and there. And, you know, and to create two services and to split the shul for something that doesn't really fit the purpose that it's meant to fit. And we've had this conversation before, really used to irk me. But it was the round tables that irked me. And then one year I said, let's try to get rid of the round tables. And I tried to get rid of the round tables. And there were certain people in the executive who sat on round tables who came down quite hard on it. And then we scrapped the round tables. And what happened is during the entire, and I learned something very important that time, but during the entire saga with the whole round tables, I had an idea for a sermon and I wrote the sermon then. And, you know, I've learned never write a sermon in anger. because this is a sermon that I wrote a month before Rosh Hashanah, which I normally never do. It was written like a month or 6 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and was written when I was quite upset. And so that when I gave over the sermon, somehow like I touched back into that nerve again, and it just went boom, and it really, and I remember that time, as on the one hand, we had perfect silence for the Shemona Esrei of Musaf that time. We really did. On the other hand, one fellow came over to me and says, my daughter is scared of you now. She just thought what were you thinking, or what were you doing? And I do believe that that's not the best way of doing things. So that I will have to at times, like you said, I'll have to impart messages that are not as sweet as other messages. But on the other hand, I think, I'm still not dealing with the teenagers. The people that I deal with are parents already. Most of the people that I speak to are 30 and above. So they're not really part of the most recent generation that we're referring to as, again, and I'll refer to it carefully, as the Snowflake Generation, because they're just not part of it. But I found that even, no matter how old you are, nobody likes getting told off. You can be 70 and you can say, well, I'm old enough to take it. All right, watch it. Just tell somebody who's 70 that you think he's no good. Watch them come back at you really, really quickly. And so I realize it's not the way people are able to, they just don't take it well. So it's not worth it. But, I do think that we need to give our children guidance about the fact that, yes, they will fail in life. And no, not everything you set yourself as a target will you be able to achieve. And if you don't achieve it, that's also fine. It's fine not to make it where you want to.
If anybody was walking through Heaton Park this morning at about 10:30, they would have heard me giving my son a lecture in the car park about things that he has a right to be offended by, things that he hasn't got a right to be offended by. My beautiful son is very, very sensitive, and his younger sister knows exactly what to say to push his buttons.
Oh boy!
She only has to mention 2 or 3 words, and she taps exactly into what's going to make him lose his temper. And her goal is to make him lose his temper. Now, he knows this, and we've practiced this before. But this morning I lost my temper because I said, why did you hurt your sister? And the answer that I got back was, because she offended me. And my response to him was, who do you think you are that you have no right to be offended by something? We all get offended by things. We all need to cope in life with people, be there our sisters who are trying to get a rise out of us, or total strangers who disagree with who we are, what we stand for, what our thoughts are. You've got to know when the right time to stand up, and also when to step back and go, okay, that's fine. I don't, people do get offended and they're able to take it sometimes, but we have a it feels the atmosphere out there at the moment, and it's also a political atmosphere, and I think it's also made its way through COVID, and you see it coming out of COVID, particularly when we start to touch on things like anti-vaxxers or vaccinations and all of that sort of stuff that you read in the papers and on social media. It is an extremely tense environment out there where people are offended. People get offended if you're too right-wing. People get offended where you're too left-wing. We are encouraging our society to be as open-minded as possible. But the question is, again, are we so open-minded that our brains have fallen out? Have we actually lost it altogether?
I think the other thing with open-minded people is the last thing open-minded people can manage is closed-minded people. They're not open-minded enough to actually hear the closed-minded person. So I'm so open-minded that that you're racist, so I won't hear what you have to say. Now, I'm not saying racism is a good thing, but if I'm open-minded, then I should allow him to have his opinion. I can disagree with it, and I do disagree with it. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have a right to have an opinion on racism. He does have a right to have that opinion. I have a right to say, I think you're blatantly wrong, and I do believe they're blatantly wrong. But but we've I think we've come so open-minded that we've gone the other way around, so that if you don't, I remember having this conversation with somebody, going back to what you spoke about within the Jewish Telegraph. If somebody wants, somebody who is born male wants to present female, they have a right to do that. I also have a right to say that I don't accept the fact that you are a female. That's my right. So I'll say, but I would like to be a female. And I say, fine, you'd like to be a female. That's okay. I got no problem with that. But I don't have to accept it. Just because you want to do that doesn't mean I have to accept it. And they can say, well, then I want to have nothing to do with you. And I can say, that's fine. Then let's have nothing to do with each other. But it's become almost like, going back to that, if I've decided now to identify as a female, you must identify me as a female. You must, because that's how I decide to identify.
So that part of the debate is almost, the minute I hear you mention something like that, my super spidey senses tingle that, hang on, this is a topic that potentially could land us all in hot water.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's one of those things. But let's take that debate then and just for a second transplant it back in something that we all have a right to talk about. And let's talk about anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Okay.
Because what we move to try and do these days is to shut down the debate on anti-Semitism as quickly as we possibly can. So you've got and rightly so. So freedom of speech, yeah, only so far. You have a university professor that is espousing anti-Semitic views. We want to get him silenced. We want to get him shut up. But in the process of doing so, are we in fact, by shutting off the argument so quickly, are we losing our skill, and it's a life skill, of actually debating the rights and wrongs of that kind of behavior? And so it's the same in the gender argument that you used as well.
Yeah, I think it just takes the heat off it if we move over to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, but anti-Semitism is something that we all have an opinion on.
Yeah. But you know what? Like, going back on that, like, I don't have to agree with it. If people dislike Jews, they dislike Jews. If somebody says, I don't like Jews, you might say, but I think that doesn't make any sense. And I'm Jewish, and I think I'm quite a nice person, and I think you're a nice person. I know lots of other Jewish people that are nice. I don't know why you dislike Jewish people, and I don't think it makes sense for you to hold that view. That might be so, but I think the person still has a right to hold that view, even if it's wrong. Do you not think people have a right to dislike Jews the same way people have a right to dislike anything else?
Yeah, and I think most of the answers that can be given come down to ignorance largely. That we don't like the things that we don't understand in life. That's just the way that it is, and we sometimes don't like the things that make us feel inferior, or the things that I don't know, feel that they're special, or whatever it may be in those debates that make somebody one day wake up and think, you know what, there's something in this anti-Semitism thing. Who do they think that they are? I'm going to get up and make it my life's work to. It's going to happen. And we have unhelpful views on our side of the debate as well. We can be extremely, Jewish people can be extremely right-wing when they want to be. We saw that in America. A lot of Trump supporters, a lot of them were Jews, and that was a very right-wing ideology. So wherever you sit on these things, you're going to end up heading. If the aim is to sort of head off debate, then I believe we're not arming our kids correctly for the rigors of the real world. I think that we are losing.
I agree. I fully agree with you.
Let's just have a quick look at some of the
Let's
comments.
Go back to some of the comments. We've been going on for so long. Saul made a comment. We didn't even get to Saul comment.
Let's have a look at Saul. Saul is my extremely hardworking brother-in-law, and he reckons that people work more in this country now and don't spend enough time with their family. That is probably true in terms of working hours. I think that's changed, and I think also, Saul, people that are working from home don't have a stop and a go anymore. They always are working because they can be always bugged at home. Clive has said that aiming for 50% of children to go to universities resulted in many with degrees packing shelves instead of having a skill which would have earned them a good salary. So he's right. It's just a fact of life. Beth Bangold has said that, however, the uni experience itself can enhance self-confidence and independence. There are positives and negatives to uni and apprentice programs. Again, the value in uni is to teach somebody independence. It used to be to teach them that they're going to have to manage their relationships in a wider world full of people that are not necessarily like them. I think that's the key. Most people, the first time they come out of their comfort zone and meet people that are not very, very similar to them in terms of background or socioeconomic class or whatever it may be, is going to be at somewhere like uni. Clive Moss Barkley, what if they don't give you
the anti-Semitism thing now?
Yeah, it's back to the anti-Semitism. Yeah, but it's true that I could probably tell you that there have been occasions where I have not got a job because my opinion was that they didn't like Jews. Do I think it's just? I don't think it's just. Do I want to live in a world where there is no anti-Semitism? Absolutely. Do I want to live in a world where there's equality? Yes. But ask me now whether I think it's a realistic expectation. It simply isn't. We are never going to get rid of these differences in opinion.
Yeah. And the truth is, they'll always, I mean, even within our world, like, so if you even, you get into this whole world of nepotism. I think in the Jewish world is a world very full of, where 6 people apply for the job, but the boss's nephew will end up getting it, no matter how good or bad he is at the job.
Or deny you planning permission for a shul? Yeah, sure.
Oh, don't do that.
No, but there have been instances where that sort of discrimination has made us as Jews have to go out and be resilient. It's taught us resilience. It's taught us to be proud. It's taught us the ability to argue in the opposite direction. And if you think about it, Clive, Whitefield Golf Club, for instance, is a very good example of a golf club that was started entirely because back in those days, and we're not going back very far at all, maybe in the 50s or 60s, Jews were not entitled to be fully paid up members of a golf club. So they had to open their own. So we didn't let anything stop us. Was it fair? No, it wasn't fair. But did that generation have something that my generation's not going to have to cope with? 100%. My kids don't understand there are going to be those barriers in life. And they won't have a clue what to do when they hit those barriers. And I think that we as
they'll
parents...
come to you, hopefully. I think the best we can hope for is that they come to us and saying, Daddy, I hit a barrier. What am I supposed to do with this barrier?
Well, I think we're going to get hate mail after this thing, because the criticism that we get from some of our listeners, even tonight maybe, is that we're a little bit circuitous. We go around in circles with the debate, and we never really get to a bottom line. We never solve these issues. So, Rabbi,
how are we supposed to solve a problem this big? You want me to change the educational system? You want me to change the politics? You want me to change employers and jobs and universities? This is too big an issue for me to do.
Look at the amount of youth who have gone on Aliyah. So our education, anti-Semitism, and Jewish education in Israel is working. Yeah, there are plenty of kids that go on Aliyah. And Phil, part of that question is, yes, we've educated them. The second part of that question we discussed a few weeks ago, do they even have options here? Do they feel that, that this country is open for them and they have a future here? Maybe even this town. So we discussed that a while ago, didn't we?
I think sometimes having experiences with anti-Semitism makes people realize, you know what, I don't belong here. I think that happened in France, actually. France had a mass exodus. There was all these people that left France. I think they changed some of the rules. They felt uncomfortable with the Muslims, and they changed some of the rules on taxes. And suddenly there were like 50,000 Jews that left France in one go to Israel. There's a mass aliyah from France. It was a big thing.
So, Rabbi, I'm going to hand over to you to tell us perhaps maybe what you feel in summarizing this, the Jewish perspective is in terms of chinuch and how we should educate our children and the balances that we need to hit. All I'll say from my point of view, taking a slightly more secular approach, is that I don't have the answers. I don't think any of us have the answers. And I think we find ourselves in a world with fresh challenges. The digital age is amazing. We have access to medical advances that our grandparents' generation couldn't even properly dream of, because it just wasn't within the scope of anything ever becoming that achievable. But we have today. We can cure simple things. Just look at the amount of people that used to die in childbirth in the old days compared to now. We have come absolute leaps and bounds. Look at the creation of the vaccine in such a short period of time. It's one of the modern miracles of our time, but it's born out of collaboration, working together, and technology. So we have all of these wonderful things that have allowed us to communicate our scientific research and share it with one another. But it is those same tools that also allow us to share the fact that we're upset, that we may be offended, that we don't like somebody else's opinion, and maybe sometimes we do have unrealistic expectations. And so what I would take away from tonight's discussion is we need to probably do more to not cut down our kids' dreams. And I don't want for a second to be thought of as a sort of parent that's going to discourage their children, but it's to reasonably manage their expectations and prepare them for a part of life that might not be as kind as we are at home. Over to you, Rabbi.
Okay, so that was very good. I think we should always do this. We should finish off with some kind of summary, because then we won't get the hate mail again. I think the other thing that I would say is, I guess, looking at it from a religious standpoint, I think the thing that we really need to teach our children from a religious standpoint is something which is known as bitachon. Bitachon means trust in God. And the idea being that if I trust the process, meaning I'm going to put everything I can into this process. I want to get a job, and I'm going to apply for this job, and I'm going to get the interview, and I'm going to put my best face forward. I won't show up unkempt. I won't show up without having a shave or without having a shower or without putting on a suit. Can't just show up in jeans and t-shirts smelling terribly and expect to get a job. That's unreasonable. But I'll do whatever is reasonably expected from me. And then beyond that, I say, look, God, it's up to you. I leave it in your hand. If I'm meant to get this job, I hope to get it. If I'm not meant to get this job, I won't get it. And if I give part of the entire process over to God and say, listen, this is for you, God, to make the final decision on, then whatever the decision is, I've done my best. God's done what he thinks is right. And I don't have to feel bad about it. I don't have to feel like a failure, because, I got something bigger coming down the road. I was just listening to a podcast today. I went on a run. I was listening to a podcast. I had a very interesting story, and I think it brings out this idea. There was this woman that made this choir, the very frum lady in Israel, and then she had a big choir, and she wanted to create a CD of her songs. And she went to speak to a rabbi about the fact that she's creating the CD of her songs because frum women will not sing in public. And she was worried, if I create these CDs and I create these tapes, people are going to start listening to them, and there'll be lots of guys, they'll find these CDs, or they'll be playing around in people's houses, and plenty of people, many will be listening to them as well. So she went to speak to a rabbi, and going around from one to the other, final bottom line that she got was, listen, probably not worth it. Just too much, as a very frum woman, this is just taking a bit of taking too much of a risk. And the woman said, at the time, I was very disappointed, but I took it, I said, look, this is how I was raised. If that's what they said, that's what I'm going to do. And so she moved on from there to speak to somebody else, a friend of hers, to say, well, look, maybe you know anybody else that could produce these, because I can't produce them myself. She says, well, yeah, I got a cousin who produces music. So she got in touch with this cousin who bought 3 of her songs, who then ended up connecting her with somebody else who was very, very big in the Jewish music scene. And this woman has now become somebody that writes music for all the biggest male stars in the Jewish music scene. And if she says, if I had fought it at the time, maybe, you know what, maybe I would have put out my CD, but I would have never ended up meeting that other person that then catapulted my career to being where I'm at today, which is a totally different place. And she said, you know what, I grew up with this idea, with this resilience that, look, if A is not going to work out, then B will work out. And if B doesn't work out, then C will work out. And it's not the end of the world. And if you trust that God has a master plan for all of us, and for some maybe it'll be more glamorous and for some less, it's going, it gives your child the ability, and it gives us the ability to have that resilience and to say, look, if it works out, it's all because God made it work out. If it doesn't work out, it's because God didn't make it work out. And I think from a religious standpoint, that's the most resilience we could give to our children. So we can always be behind them and say, I'll be behind you 100% of the way. But if you fail, then understand that there's a God in the world also. And sometimes God is just saying no, and that's fine. And that's okay. So I guess that would be my religious slant on what we've said tonight. It's been like so long since we've done this. I really appreciate coming together with you on Sunday nights and having these chats. I appreciate all the people making the comments, and I think there's a lot of people that commented, and a lot of people had a lot of really good stuff to say. So I'm really excited for 2 weeks' time when we come back.
It's always worthwhile talking about it, even the more difficult topics. We don't always have the answers, but that ultimately is.
We usually don't, I think.
Is life. Okay, everybody. We wish you all a very successful week, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.